Hello. Can you hear
Hey.
me, guys? Oh, okay, cool.
Yep, I
Just
can hear
testing my headset. Thanks.
Hello.
Hey.
Oh,
Okay, yeah, I do get audio.
are you in a Google office today?
Yeah, I try to when it's not the 9 a.m. one. Thank you for working on the website stuff. Sorry, I got to go to the
Oh, yeah, no worries.
bureaucracy for that.
I figured it would be kind of a process to get logo clearance for things. But yeah, Rita and I were talking one day and just like, it might be nice to have like a nice looking landing page with like a big prompt to like steer people to the policy library and things like that.
Yeah, something that looks like official or whatever.
Yeah.
How are people's weeks?
Busy.
Rainy?
Busy and rainy?
Yeah.
Is your house on
I
a
don't know.
hill?
I'm in Seattle and it's sunny as all hell here. Like,
Yeah.
I suppose us and the Bay have kind of traded weather this week.
I just want to go out. Really good out.
You're in Seattle as well?
Yeah, Nilik's here too. Yeah. It seems like it's supposed to get back to rain tomorrow though, so they're just like staring out the window and enjoying it while I can.
Yeah, I was gonna say today is getting sunnier, so I think you're getting the rain back.
Yeah.
Should we get started?
Yeah, let's do it.
Trying to find the meeting notes. Looks like we have Jaded with some pop-up discussions.
Yep. So I saw your comment, Max, about passing the array of messages to publish batch, and I was wondering in that case, how would we construct a batch, right? Like it would be still in the driver, but an additional function that would construct a batch, and whenever the batch is constructed, we will just publish it. Is that how that's gonna work?
I'm honestly confused as to like what the question is, because I thought this was sort of a known flow, right? Where if we have publish batch and the driver, or honestly the subsystem, in this case Dapper, supports publish batch would just like drop through to that. But if it doesn't, then publish batch is just a wrapper around, a loop to publish, right?
Yep.
Does that answer the question, or does that?
So the question is, in order to loop over the publish, we will need an array of message, right? To publish individual message or anything like a batch or let's say file. In publish, it works as that whenever you get a violation, you just call a publish. But in publish batch, you will need to construct a batch also, right? Like rather than just calling publish, we will need an array to loop over. And I'm wondering how and where this array should be constructed if batching is enabled.
So I don't think there's like a hard and fast rule for that, right? Like that's going to be use case specific. So if you're looking at audit, right?
Okay.
One thing I would look at is kind of the intent of batch publishing, which is to minimize traffic, right? And to get as much through a single request as you can, also to allow sort of an impedance mismatch where the publisher can publish like so many messages at once, but the reader can read a different amount of messages, that kind of thing. And generally what that means is you want to lower the overall load of the API server, and particularly one thing batching does is it lowers spikes of requests. So how you would map that intent to audit, I would say would be, we definitely want to use batching, right? But then the question is at what granularity?
Yeah.
I would say waiting to the end of an audit to publish all results is probably counterproductive, because at that point you're reintroducing a spike, right? After every audit run, you get like a wave of messages and then nothing, right? Whereas if you spread out the batches as much as possible, you still are you get a more like consistent low level of traffic trickling in. Like it's still going to be bursty, right? Because audits kind of bursty, right? Scrape, audit, scrape, audit, scrape, audit, I believe is the pattern. But you also get the benefit of batching in the sense of you're sending one request every burst event rather than say 50. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So you are suggesting that we construct the batch of messages somewhere within the audit as well, and whenever we record n number of violation, we just call on publish batch. Right?
So whenever we encounter a violation, I would suspect, because if we only have one violation, it's not a batch, first of all. Though you could get like multiple violations. After every constraint or after every kind, it's not clear to me that there's a right answer that jumps out of the gate. The good part is that we're not coupled to whatever, we're not beholden to whatever choice we make, right? Like this is not a user-facing change, right? All the user is doing is subscribing to the message queue and saying, maybe give me so many messages at a time. It doesn't really have, as far as I can tell, much of an opinion as to the frequency with which those messages are published, right? And really the impact of the choice is around scaling, right? Like what minimizes network capacity cost, what lowers the resource usage for the pub sub queue, balanced with trying to, because these things, and I guess, okay, so this is a little bit of coupling. So downstream, because what you have is pipelines subscribing to this pub sub queue, right? And pipelines, yes, they're asynchronous, but it's nice if they could stay busy, right? Rather than have so they have a constant low level of activity rather than large bursty activity, because then you can subscribe. Then you can sort of size your pipeline to a low level of constant activity. I mean, even then, the fact that it's a message queue, like it will drain itself over time anyway. So it's not hugely impactful, but it is nicer if you get median load. Sorry, I'm just sort of listing a lot of considerations rather than making a conclusion here. But I think the guidelines are, one, we can change our minds, and that's like pretty low friction. Two, probably the right thing to do is to have something that has a relatively consistent low publish rate of messages, rather than to do something where it's like publish everything toward the end of the process.
I was
Okay.
just going to ask, should we use our existing constraint violations limit as like an example? So I think we do like 20 as the default there. Do we want to batch to 20, for example?
I don't think so. I think the most important thing is to actually not have a violation limit. Like honestly,
no, I mean, it's like a similar idea. So say, then we can set constraint violations limit to 0 in for the subscribers, right? And then similarly idea, we do like 20 there, right? And then in batching, it would be, we would batch 20 and then send it over. And 20 can be any numbers. It's just an example.
For an MVP, I would just do whatever's easy to code. I wouldn't try to do batching as like a feature, right? I would just, if it's convenient to, after auditing every kind, send out the violations then. If it happens to be like 15 messages, we send 15. If it happens to be 100, we send 100. If it's 1, we send 1, right? Like there's...
So you were thinking per audit cycle?
Definitely not at the end of audit, right? This is a good.
We can do per constraint also. Like whenever constraint is finished auditing, we can push out every violation per constraint.
What I'm saying is, I think we're over designing this, right? And really, it's look at for the MVP, just look at the code, figure out where it's easy to put it in the code. And the one thing we do want to be mindful of is memory usage in the local server, right? So if let's just pretend another reason not to do, let's cache all of these and publish the violations at the end of the audit cycle, is then all those violations need to be stored in memory, right? So it may be that the easiest thing to do here is to just publish the violations as they're encountered, right? Like the same place where we're logging violations is where we're publishing them.
Yeah.
And then that puts us in a position to get some real world data around, is batching going to have any kind of performance benefit? Or is there a need for batching? Do we know outside of Dapper, right, which doesn't have batching support but will have batching support, what queuing protocols, what message queues have batches?
We know for sure that some does have batching based on Dapper's enhancement, because their approach is whenever underneath broker supports batching, we will support batching. Otherwise, we'll just, so we know for sure that some have, but I, for one, don't know exact which ones have. Right?
Yeah. Okay.
So are you saying we ship the initial version without batching, and then we can add it later? I mean, that's fine with me.
I mean, yes, if that's the easiest thing to do. Like if there's a natural place to put batching in the code, why not? What I wouldn't do is try to design some sort of like batching system, right? If there's a place where we get an array of violations just naturally, because that's how the API works, right? You call gatekeeper, you get an array of violations. That's a batch, right? Because it's an array. But I wouldn't put like some object in that like queues up messages to be sent, and as soon as we hit 50 messages or whatever, send out a batch, and then at the end of the audit, if the queue isn't full, flush the queue. Like designing a system like that, I think it's premature.
I have a related question. Do we foresee people using PubSub together with writing the violations to constrain status?
I think they serve different purposes.
Well,
Status, good.
The reason why I'm bringing that up is I could see, I think Jay, you said like, oh, what if we just batch it like per constraint? I think that's how audit is writing to this constraint status today. So if we write them at the same time, it might be more consistent. If I were a user who's looking at both, otherwise you could get out of sync data.
But I think that's limited when we write it.
Yeah, that's
by default
truncated.
20s. We don't write more.
I know, but I'm saying you might as well just leverage that logic. I think that's why Jay mentioned. I could be wrong, but
it'll be capped in that sense.
Yeah, I agree.
No, we write like whatever the limit is, right? But the data is there, so you could.
Oh, you're saying the original audit results, not the
right. So
no, we definitely don't want to do that then, because part of capping the audit results is capping the memory usage of the audit pod, right? Like because constraints, like the way it works is we're scraping the API server per kind, right? And then we're caching that kind to disk. Once the list is completed, then we run a review for every object that we've listed. Then we move on to the next kind.
I mean, we still have the data because we log it.
So in that sense, we're treating them differently, right? Like the limit is applicable if you're writing the status to constraint. But if PubSub doesn't, if the goal is to get rid of this limit, then are we saying like you shouldn't, as a user, you really shouldn't be using both at the same time?
I think, as I said, they have different uses, right? Like the violation status is a good, hey, I have access to the cluster right now. What's going on here? Are there any violations? Whereas if you actually want the full picture, right, then that truncation stuff is not acceptable in my view.
Right, but the goal of reducing memory footprint of audit would be like gone because you're essentially saying, hey, I want everything, right?
No, because you wouldn't, these things are not done simultaneously, right? We log every single violation, right? It exists in the output of the logging, and that's because we log the violations as we encounter them, right? Whereas for the stuff that goes in status, we need to cache the violations for the duration of audit, right? Because we need to scrape all the kinds before we know, because if a constraint matches all kinds, it could have violations from all kinds, right? So those
Gotcha.
violations live for the whole process.
Yeah, that's how that's written in the code as well. We just store like 20 or whatever total
Right.
violations needed, and then everything else we just log.
So if that's the case, then in order to not store it, right, to reduce the memory footprint, then we should send things to we should publish things as soon as we have them, as opposed to keeping them around.
Right. Which doesn't necessarily mean don't use the batch publish, right? But it might mean, at least for an MVP, you publish like natural batches rather than manufactured batches.
Sure.
Okay, so are we good with removing the batching in the first release and then we can add it?
What do you mean by removing like special batching logic, or removing the batching call altogether?
The published batching now, because it's empty right now because
Yeah.
the Dapper SDK doesn't support the batch yet.
I am like 80% sure that there is a natural place to call publish batch in audit, regardless of what we've said, right? Because if you call constraint framework.review, you're going to get back, say, 0 to infinity violations, right? You get back an array. So that right there is a natural batch. Does that make sense?
I am not familiar with which part or which review function you're talking about. Can you share a link or something I can look at?
I can. I'm just talking about the constraint framework review function, though, right? Like, review this object. Does it have any violations? It'll take me a second to dig through the code if
It's
someone wants
also
to
in the
know.
audit. Like we call the API server to get all the resources, right? And for each one we call opa.review.
Yeah. Yep. Line 487 in audit/manager.go. I'm gonna paste the link in chat. There we go.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so, and you see in line 493, you have for R in range resp.results append. So I'm not
that's
saying.
OPA cache, Max.
Oh, okay. Well,
There's
The other one
another
is
one.
592. That's the one without OPA cache.
Okay, and there's also 568. I see 487, 568.
592 is the one we chunk it. I think that's the one that when we chunk it.
Okay, I for some reason. Oh, right. Some of this is generator resources. That's why there's two calls. Here, I'm just gonna copy permalink. There's also this bit that I'm seeing. Yeah, but more the point is, and I'm not saying this is exactly where the publish batch should go, right? This is me just looking at the code like right now as we're talking. But the point is there are lists involved, right?
Yeah.
So there's definitely opportunity to just publish a list wholesale without authoring a lot of code to like make a tunable batch size or whatever. I'm not saying that we'll never want to go to tunable batch size either. Just saying for something quick and easy, this seems like MVP to me.
Okay. That seems fair. Let me just I am not that familiar with this part of code, so I need to first understand it to integrate the other stuff also. Yeah, good. So there, this automatically solves the second question I was about to ask, that when do we publish? I guess we publish whenever we get a list immediately, not storing it anywhere, right?
Yeah, there's probably some wiggle room in that statement, so just use your best judgment.
Yep.
As to there's probably a couple of lists here.
Yeah, I guess that unlocks me for this pops up. So do we still want to get it done for this release, right? Like we don't want to skip it. For right in this PR, we want to still get batching done in this PR. That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, like honestly, getting it done is what, 50 lines of code?
Yep.
Generously. So may as well.
Okay.
And Rita says, I assume this new feature also works for audit from cache. I would assume so too.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. We are not doing anything to get violations just for pops up, right? It's just an additional thing in audit. So like however audit gets their violation from, we should work. It like pops ups would work.
Yeah, it would be good if the code isn't copy pasted between the two code paths. I'm not sure, as I said, it feels to me like that should be possible with how things are written, but can't say that for 100%.
And it sounds like the batching will be limited by the audit chunk size then. In
No,
a sort of manner, because we get those in the chunks, right? So the
No.
list can be the maximum the audit chunk size.
no. So the audit chunk size, that is when we're listing objects from the API server and caching them to disk,
Right.
that is the maximum size of the list.
Yeah, that's the maximum one. So the maximum batch size would be the audit chunk size, assuming everything is a violation.
No, because what we do then is we write that list to disk and then we audit the cached resources from disk. So there's a decoupling there between chunk size and audit. And then also every resource can raise multiple violations, right? If you have 50 constraints, each constraint raises a violation. One resource turns into 50 violation objects. Also, there's no limit on the amount of violations a single constraint can raise. So you could have one object, one constraint, 50 violations. That also, it's not a realistic outcome, but it's a possible outcome.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
So, and that's where I'm saying there's a couple of lists we could deal with here, right? Like if we just batch per resource, right? The list could be the list of violations per resource. If for some reason, and I don't think this is true, but maybe if we batch per kind, right? Because that's somehow easier to do, then that would be a different scale of batching, right? But then there's also the possibility that this is just intractable and it's way easier to publish individually, right? Because we're just looking very quickly at this code here. So I would tend to go with the thing that fits reasonably quickly, right? That's reasonably easy to do quickly, but like kind of tries to do batching where it can.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yep.
Does that answer your questions,
Yep.
Jade?
Yep. Yeah, it answers. I think we covered both of the questions I had. Thanks.
Cool. Yeah, thank you.
By the
Uh,
way, 312 RC is in 2 days.
For Gatekeeper,
Yeah.
to be honest, I don't see this PR getting in 2 days. Like the I think the thorniest issue I see right now that and maybe it's like cleared up. I didn't take a good look at the code that's been changed yet, but the controller as written, it doesn't look like it reconciles deletes.
Yeah, I am working on it right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So maybe it's realistic. I don't want to be too pessimistic here, but there's definitely like non-trivial issues to be ironed out that aren't just matters of opinion, right? Like the config map thing versus should it be a CRD? That's a debate, and maybe we can try to alpha it. But the handling deletes or not handling deletes, that's a memory leak issue.
Yeah.
Do we want to start with a config map and then turn into a CRD, or any thoughts around that?
I mean, I know that we're a little tired of always having CRDs, but I think one benefit of CRDs is the RBAC ability of them, and then if we think about the model for how to extend this stuff, if people write a separate controller for their separate drivers, right? That's one way of handling this. That should be pretty forkable pretty quickly. And the last benefit of CRDs would be the sort of self-documenting. You can have a schema, and that schema can have parameters. I don't know, like if we could figure out a way of like not making it committal for the alpha, right? Then whatever. We can try things and see what sticks. So I don't want to be like too dogmatic if we can de-risk the discussion. Did people have thoughts or?
So I have one question about CRD. We'll be defining dynamic schema of some sort, right? Not structured one, because like to cater to every other driver, they'll need different kind of structure to have it configured properly.
That's up in the air to me, right? Like you could have a different CRD per driver, right? If you have a different controller per driver, right? That's one model. And as I said, like having different controllers, that's pretty easy to fork, right? We just need to register those controllers and bootstrap them, and there's ways to wire that all together so that only touches like a few files, right? And all the controller code obviously would live separately. You could create like a generic CRD that's schemaless, that has preserve unknown fields. Obviously, then you're foregoing the documentation benefit if you do that. And the other thing about yeah. And then it's just a question of if you have the generic CRD, right? That also means you have this kind of like generic controller, right? So then you have like a partially structured thing where you need at least enough information to identify which driver the config is for, right? So that you can instantiate, you could feed the config to the appropriate driver, and it can do all the validation and loading, blah blah blah. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, yeah, and so the outcome of the discussion like really does change the shape of the code, right? But probably most important would be that if we go one way and then change tax, users would need to update their config to match that change, right? I don't think there's a way we could insulate users from being uncertain on this. But if we want to hide behind, well, it's alpha, give us feedback around if this flow works for you, or if you need something different because this is how your organization like does security or whatever. I think that's also valid.
So bottom line, we are going ahead with config map, and then based on feedback, we'll implement controllers and CRDs.
I mean, I'm hearing like my personal preference would be to use CRDs like out of the bat, but I'm not hearing anything from Rita or Surtesh, and I think they were the ones who were like more pro config map.
I don't have a strong opinions. I mean, it's just there's more overhead on the CRDs, and that needs like more design and like thinking about all the cases and stuff.
Yeah. Well, here's this is probably the more salient question. If we used CRDs, right, would we want a unique CRD per driver, or would we want just one schemaless CRD? At which point it starts looking kind of like a config map. And why I say that's salient is I feel like the friction between moving from config maps to that schemaless CRD for users would be much lower than if we had unique CRDs. It's not obvious to me what the implications are for someone writing their own driver, right? Like which would, my thought is that unique CRD, unique controller maybe gives them a little bit more control, but also might require a bit more effort on their part, though it might be a wash, right? Because schemaless, you're just moving the effort of like creating a schema from like creating a CRD to parsing a JSON object. You do lose some ability to validate the schema, right, at application time. We could like add some of that back after the fact, maybe using the Gator webhook, but that would add some more complexity to adding more drivers if we tried to do that.
Yeah, I mean, schemaless definitely loses one of the advantages, which is like validation. Yeah, I mean, definitely trade-offs. And there is the CRD fatigue. I mean, how about we launch with a config map and like as alpha, hey, this can change, whatever. And depending on feedback, we go to CRDs.
Okay. Yeah, so then I think what we know is there's a config map where the data probably is YAML structured, JSON structured, because it's a binary blob as far as K8s is concerned. I'd say YAML structured.
Yeah.
And there's one field that identifies the driver, right? So you have, I'm using driver as kind of a working title, whatever we want though, like driver : Dapper in this instance.
I think we call it provider in the code.
Provider?
Yeah,
Okay.
we could pop sub provider or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, whatever name is reasonable. Something the is PubSub provider : Dapper, and then another field that is config,
We
right?
can,
And then everything lives under that.
yeah, we can do one config map per a connection, and like that config map indicates also that which provider this connection belongs to, so that whenever a config map is deleted or updated, it's easier to act on individual connection based on the name of the connection, or like as a map or something, rather than, if that
Yeah.
works.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay.
That does imply that. Oh no, for audit. Well, okay. Yeah, no, audit, we have these flags, right? Like connection.
Yeah.
So there would be an expected period where the config map has not yet been loaded by the controller, but audit's going to like run immediately, right? Because it reads the flags and off to the races, right? So there will be a period of time where that driver is not yet instantiated.
Yeah. So like there are checks already. If the PubSub is not enabled and driver is not initiated, PubSub functionality as a whole will not be enabled.
Okay, and like log or something like that.
Yeah.
So people
It's
see.
there.
Okay.
It's there.
Cool.
And I pasted the current config map today. So sounds like we want to remove size from this, right? And then turn this into a YAML.
Yeah.
We can call component PubSub provider. I don't know.
Yeah, like we would want a component to be peer to audit. Well, we wouldn't want audit at all, right? Because this is just identifying a connection, and the flags are what's configuring audit. But yeah, assuming audit is actually like config, then component would be a peer to config, and config would have like global configuration for the driver. Batch size, I don't think is a driver level parameter. Maximum batch size, maybe, right? I actually would take my cues from what Dapper is trying to do, right? Because we obviously can create a max batch size just by, well, it actually wouldn't do anything, but you can imagine slicing and dicing the stuff, but honestly just delegating to the driver is the ideal end case, I feel like, or delegating to Dapper, I mean. Provider enable bad. Okay, because we're saying that maybe Dapper has toggleable batching. Components, PubSub.
In this case, component is going to be Dapper, not PubSub, right? Or
So that's basically component PubSub is the configuration that Dapper driver needs, not we. So this can be, so like, except provider is a variable name basically, which can be like something like Dapper or so for instance, these are the configurations needed for Dapper, right? Like then if we do RabbitMQ, then there will be different set of configurations needed for it. So things like
I would
that.
have these as two different things. I would have it provider : Dapper and then config colon the object, just because like that maps to sort of K8s best practices nowadays, right? Where if you can avoid dynamic fields, it plays nicer with things.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
So it will be like predefined, a config or something like that.
Yeah.
In JSON versus YAML, I don't actually care, but it should be one of the two,
Okay.
or it needs to be because of config map. If it were like schemaless CRD, it would be moot because K8s will read either.
We could do YAML just so it's in line with the other stuff, I guess. And
Yeah.
like we can add comments there, which would be nice.
Cool.
So it's going to be like config and then like a dapper JSON, I mean, I guess YAML structure, and then like a RabbitMQ1. Can it be like two things at the same time?
I would say you'd want one config map per connection, like JDip was
Yeah.
saying.
Okay.
So maybe an additional, like rather than something like this, maybe provider, dapper, connection name, IZ, and then
Yeah, we're definitely not ready for the release. We're still designing.
Yeah, but yeah, yeah, I agree. There's like non-trivial stuff to work out, but yeah, that's to me feels right. Where the stuff that is universal to this like adapter layer that we have, the pub sub provider. What are we calling this thing? Pub sub system. Those things are top level variables, and then anything that's provided directly to the driver would be under config.
And should we also like decide a label or something through which we can filter out which config maps we want to do reconcile on?
That's another good reason to use a CRD, in my view, is it's very clear what you're watching at that point. And also config maps can get quite large. Granted, we only need to watch things in Gatekeeper system, but I'm not sure how hard it would be to set that up for a config map watch. And I don't want to be caching gigantic config maps in RAM. So CRD solves that out the gate. We could still use this design, right? This is not wasted work if we want to go that route, right? It's just the schemaless CRD at that point.
Why would we be caching like large config maps?
Because informer cache, so there is some configuration knob. It's not something we've needed to play with, so I'm not too up on the details and limitations here. So if we want to do the research and figure out what's possible, maybe it will work out. But by default, when you do controller, when you set up your controller and you do the watch command, right? And you say, let's create a watch for, in this case, config maps. That'll send out a request to the API server and it will watch all config maps, right? And internally, what controller runtime does is it caches the state of all objects whose watch it observes, right? So you're going to receive watch events for all config maps across the cluster. and you're going to be caching in RAM the state of all config maps across the cluster. Unless you do, I think it can be restricted by namespace, maybe by label, but I don't know then like the implications of, well, what if we also want to sync config maps for policy, or a user wants to sync config maps for referential constraints? What impact might restricting it to gatekeeper system have on that? Like, do those play nicely with each other, or are they mutually exclusive? But I don't know. Does that answer your question, or?
Yep.
Hey, we have 7 minutes left. Should we let Xander go? Because
Yeah.
Oh no, I'm sorry, Xander.
Oh, it's totally fine. The stuff I have is not super urgent. So yeah, and I can actually definitely get through it in 7 minutes without a problem. So let me see if it will give me permission to share. Yes. Okay. Just wanted to solicit some initial feedback on the landing page here, if possible. Still working out what needs to be done for logo usage. But I figure, we've got the big browse the policy library button here. And then I added a little section for might change the phrasing here, but like managed services and integrations and stuff like that, because a lot of these services are like Rancher has an installable add-on for their RKE, and OpenShift has something too. So this might be a good thing to highlight. Yeah, this was just the initial stab at things. Have the screenshot in Slack too. So yeah, that was the first thing. Send me a note if there's anything you feel like I should add to this before opening an initial PR once I get the logo stuff worked out. That's topic number 1. Topic number 2, I've been working on, not for Gatekeeper yet, but for some of our the other open source projects I work on, public facing. Oh, Sardesh, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, what does the website look in dark mode?
Oh, no idea. Haven't tried.
So if you go to and then click on the next to the dark thing. No, it's next to the search.
Next to Octocat.
Next
next to
Octocat.
Octocat.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, there it is. Okay. So it looks like you might need to optimize some of the things. I think it looks good, except Red Hat one.
Yeah, that, and then I need to do AWS down here too. Mobile optimization as well. I haven't played around with much yet. Like there's breakpoints in the CSS, but it's been a long time since I've done front end dev, like many years.
One of the reasons that I went with Docusaurus was it automatically switches to dark mode if your system is in dark mode. So a lot of folks might get the dark mode automatically. So it sounds like you're using your Mac in light mode. Yeah,
I'm one of those heathens that actually prefers light mode. I know that makes me like
100% dark mode.
Yeah, I will make sure to check that and make some updates. GitHub Projects has this like super cool new roadmap view that I'm really liking. And so I've been putting together these public roadmaps for other projects just to highlight like user facing changes that are coming up on various projects. And it's something I could put together for Gatekeeper too. I don't think I have access on the repo to like create or manage projects or anything like that. But if there's interest, I can get the access. I can put that, I know we have like external data response caching coming up and PubSub and stuff like that that could be highlighted on like an external facing roadmap. This does let you link issues too. The only reason that it's not here is because Eraser is under the Azure organization. And if you put an issue on the board, it forces you to keep the board as private, even though issues are completely public. So I have just added links to the issues in the descriptions, and then it's fine to be public. Anyway, with Gatekeeper, we'd be able to actually link issues as roadmap items. So yeah, if there's interest, I can do that. That's all I have.
Yeah, I put some thoughts on the, just like two quick, like a get started button on the landing page, I think is always nice. Which, you know, we have that in the docs, but you know, just here's the
Right there.
install. Oh, god damn it. Okay. Well, there are.
We need to build like do like a marquee and what was it called? Like old school HTML, like
Like the blinky, like
oh Blink, yeah, it's called
yeah.
Blink.
There's not nearly enough blink nowadays.
I think it got removed because people abused it.
Okay, and then like just some like examples then, or links to examples is something that like makes the value proposition concrete, or as concrete as possible. Like it's super hard when you're looking at projects like and trying to figure out what exactly do you do, you know, because oftentimes they do a lot and it's hard to summarize. Anyway, with regard to the project thing, it seems like a good idea. I just am wondering how good we are at actually sticking to a roadmap, and how often
I think so. When I added this to the agenda, I think I phrased it as roadmap questions. And I think if along with that, folks are willing to like try and, you know, like shape a roadmap and work towards it, like that's something I'm happy to try and help with too, if there's interest. You know, I know things have been, we've made pretty light usage of like milestones and such up until now, but things have been pretty ad hoc. So, you know, that it could be as simple as me doing something like that with what we have planned existing, or I can try to like really PM the thing and we can start shaping a roadmap. You know, whatever folks' preferences are.
I was gonna ask, like, is there reason why we don't want to use milestones, since that's how we're kind of tracking releases? So I'm wondering if that could
Milestones would definitely still be part of it. What I've been doing, at least for other projects like this, is just like from a purely like customer external perspective, like, and you can actually have milestones shown as like markers on the chart here, and have items associated with milestones. I think milestones are great.
Okay, so this is like on top of milestones, sounds like. Okay. I mean, I'm definitely not opposed to it. I think it's just a matter of having time to put things on the board and move things around and finishing things, I guess.
Well, and there it'll be funny, like there will be a bit of a priority shuffle too, I think. Like mutation is always interesting for me, I think, right? Because that one like tends to get on the back burner, at least for me, like relative to like the cell cap, right? And so that's not to say the effort will be is not a good idea, just that it will then probably be pretty revealing of like when that happens, and I'm curious to see how that will play out. That's not a me saying we shouldn't do it at all. That's just me thinking out loud of but this will be very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to like help out in whatever capacity folks are interested in. It's, my job as an open source PM at Microsoft. Gatekeeper is definitely under my purview, but because it is a project not explicitly owned by Microsoft, I don't want to just like insert myself into something where like I haven't done much work with the project in the past. So this is my offer to help in a PM capacity where it is desired with the project.
No, I think we need it, to be honest. Like, if I were to look at this and I would think like me putting in the time myself to keep it up to date, I'd be like, I can't. But
yeah, I
Yeah.
same thing as Max. Yeah, I mean, we can definitely use some help wherever we can. Yeah.
Yeah, in the case of like the other projects, like these boards for Eraser and CSI Secret Store Driver, I have just planned on managing them. I'm not asking the devs to, which is also why I ended up creating these boards like completely separate from the work boards that people are using, because it's like, they can just continue to use the work boards as they see fit, and then I'll manage this like roadmap view.
yeah,
I
well,
think there's
okay.
oh, sorry, I definitely see a lot of value with this, and I think maybe along with this, I would like to advocate like some kind of planning meeting, because we haven't done those in any recent times. We used to spend like maybe the first 20-30 minutes of this call triaging issues, but we stopped doing that, and I definitely don't think we don't even do milestone planning anymore. We did at one point, but I think because everybody's so busy. Yeah. So I think that would be super helpful.
Yeah, I mean, the irony I think right now is we have a pretty good sense of like directionally stuff we're working on. Like cell cap is top of mind on my end. We've got the pub sub effort going. There's resource expansion, external data caching. Like there's a lot of like there's honestly more work that we know we're actively interested in than there's people like capacity to do the work, right? Which is like good in the sense of we're not rudderless, bad in the sense that we know there's so much we want to do, but we can't do it. And it does put like an interesting dynamic too on the notion of like planning and triage and that kind of stuff, right? Because every like issue then is like, okay, well, is it more important than the stuff the long-term stuff we're working on, or does it like reshuffle the priorities there? Is it long-term? Yeah, and then is spending the effort to the extent that effort then eats into the development time for these things we know we want, right? The value trade-off there. These are not complete thoughts on my ends.
But I think that's where a PM can really help a lot. I'm with you, Max. Like we all kind of know what we need to do, but that is not publicly visible.
Yeah.
And I think that's the value of something like this dashboard. I feel. So baby steps. So maybe just to start is maybe actually plan milestones and put stuff there. And even if we end up like moving things around, that's okay. But at least that's visible to people. And then as there are new issues that come up that we deal with, then we can add to the board and make them more discoverable.
Yeah, sounds good. given that we're at time, I will start a thread in the maintainers channel on Slack. And we can talk about like a planning cadence. What I typically do for the other projects I'm working on right now is a monthly planning. But I'll start a thread and we can kind of decide collectively what we want to do.
Yeah, and I think we could just feel it out too, right? Like I don't feel like I hear your reticence of like, oh, I don't want to just like come in and manage it, but I think that, you know, to some extent, why not? You know, and we could just see how things work and adjust as we learn.
Yeah. Well, Xander, you're in the driver's seat.
All right.
So you can tell us what to do. Okay.
That's all the permission I needed. You don't know what you signed up for.
We need more structure for sure. Yeah.
We are excellent cats to herd.
All right. Thanks, everybody. See ya.
Bye bye.